Hey there, beautiful people. Welcome back to Mind-Blowing Stories, your favorite channel for real-life tales that'll knock your socks clean off. I'm your host, Joe Sullivan, coming at you live from my little apartment here in Phoenix, Arizona. Before we dive into today's story, I gotta ask you folks a favor. I see that 96 of you watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel, and honestly, that breaks this old heart of mine. We've got hundreds of incredible stories on this channel. Everything from my days in Vietnam to the time I accidentally became a local hero by catching a bank robber with my fishing net. So please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It's completely free, and it really helps an old guy like me keep these stories coming. Also, don't forget to smash that like button if you enjoy what you hear, and drop a comment down below telling me what you think. I read every single one, and your thoughts mean the world to me. Now, I'm 65 years old, been retired from my job at the school district for about 3 years now. Spent most of my working life driving school buses, 37 years of dealing with kids who thought they knew everything. But before all that, I had quite the adventure-filled life. Served in Vietnam, worked construction, even tried my hand at being a traveling salesman for a few months. But today, I want to tell you about the most important story of my life. The story of how I met my dear wife, Margaret. God rest her soul. This story takes place back in 1983. I was 24 years old, fresh out of a bad breakup with a girl named Susan, who ran off with my best friend from high school. I was living in a tiny studio apartment above Murphy's hardware store on Main Street in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Population 2,847, if you counted Mrs. Henderson's 12 cats individually, which everyone did because she treated them like family. I had just started my job as a school bus driver for Cedar Falls Elementary and Middle School. The pay wasn't much, about $180 a week, but it came with benefits and was steady work. Plus, I genuinely enjoyed the kids, even when they were being little hellions. It was the third week of September, and the leaves were just starting to turn those beautiful autumn colors that make Iowa look like a postcard. I remember pulling up to the school that morning in Bus 7, a big yellow International that had seen better days, but still ran like a dream. The engine had this particular rumble that I'd grown fond of, almost like a giant cat purring. That's when I saw her for the first time. Margaret Patterson was standing by the front steps of the school, wearing a navy blue dress with tiny white flowers on it and holding a stack of papers that kept threatening to blow away in the September breeze. She had auburn hair that caught the morning sunlight like spun copper, and when she smiled at the kids getting off my bus, I swear my heart skipped 3 beats and did a little dance. "Good morning," she called out to the children as they rushed past her into the building. Her voice had this warm, musical quality that made you want to hear her say everything twice. I sat there in the driver's seat probably longer than I should have, just watching her greet each child individually. She knew their names, every single one of them, even though she'd only been teaching there for 2 weeks. Later, I found out she'd spent her evenings memorizing the school directory just so she could make each kid feel special. "You gonna move this bus sometime today, Joe?" hollered Mr. Patterson. No relation to Margaret, just an unfortunate coincidence in surnames. He was the head of maintenance and had a voice that could wake the dead. "Other buses need to get through." I snapped back to reality, waved at him, and pulled forward. But as I drove away, I caught Margaret's eye in my rearview mirror. She gave me a little wave, and I nearly drove straight into Mrs. Kowalski's prized rose bushes. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I'd had crushes before, sure, but this was different. This felt like someone had taken a photograph of the perfect woman and somehow made her real. I found myself wondering what her laugh sounded like, what books she read, whether she liked coffee or tea in the morning. The next day, I made sure to arrive at school 5 minutes early. I told myself it was just to be more punctual, but deep down, I knew I was hoping for another glimpse of the woman in the navy blue dress. She was there again, this time wearing a green sweater that made her eyes look like emeralds. But something was different. She seemed nervous, distracted. She kept glancing over her shoulder like she was expecting someone, and her usual warm smile seemed forced. During lunch break, I was in Murphy's hardware store, buying some light bulbs for my apartment, when I overheard Mrs. Henderson talking to Murphy himself about the new teacher. Poor dear, Mrs. Henderson was saying, shaking her head. Running away from some terrible situation down in Des Moines. Principal Morrison told me she showed up with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. Wouldn't surprise me if there was an abusive husband in the picture. Murphy nodded grimly. Well, she's safe here in Cedar Falls. We take care of our own. I pretended to be very interested in comparing different wattages of light bulbs, but my heart was racing. The thought of someone hurting this beautiful, gentle woman made my hands clench into fists. That evening, I did something I'd never done before in my entire life. I went to the Cedar Falls Public Library and checked out a book on teaching methods. I figured if I was going to work up the courage to talk to Margaret, I should at least have something intelligent to say. The librarian, Miss Chen, raised an eyebrow. Planning a career change, Joe? Something like that, I mumbled, clutching the book like it contained state secrets. For the next week, I studied that book like I was cramming for the most important test of my life. I learned about different learning styles, classroom management techniques, and the importance of positive reinforcement. Most of it went over my head, but I picked up enough to sound reasonably intelligent. My chance came on a Friday afternoon. I was doing my usual maintenance check on Bus 7 when I heard someone crying. It was coming from behind the school, near the small playground that the kindergarteners used. I followed the sound and found Margaret sitting on a swing, tears streaming down her face. She was holding a crumpled letter in her hands, and her whole body was shaking. Now, I'm not usually one to intrude on someone's private moments, but something about her distress called to every protective instinct I had. I approached slowly, like you might approach a wounded animal. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She looked up, startled, and quickly wiped her eyes. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize anyone was—" "I'm fine, really." But she clearly wasn't fine. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she kept glancing at the letter like it might catch fire at any moment. "I'm Joe," I said, settling onto the swing next to her. "Joe Sullivan. I drive Bus 7. "Margaret?" she replied softly. "Margaret Patterson? I teach second grade." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the chains of the swings creak in the breeze. Finally, she spoke again. "Do you ever feel like your past is chasing you, Mr. Sullivan?" The vulnerability in her voice nearly broke my heart. "Every day, ma'am. Every single day." She looked at me with surprise. "Really?" I nodded. "Vietnam. Some things happened over there that, well, let's just say I understand about running from the past." She studied my face for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to trust me. Finally, she held up the crumpled letter. "It's from someone I used to know. He found out where I am." The fear in her voice made my blood boil. Without thinking, I reached over and gently took the letter from her hands. "May I?" She nodded, and I smoothed out the paper. It was written in sloppy handwriting, clearly by someone who'd been drinking. "Maggie, found you in that little nowhere town. Thought you could hide from me forever? I'm coming for you, baby. We belong together and you know it. Rick." I felt my jaw tighten. This Rick fellow? He your husband? Margaret's cheeks flushed red. Ex-husband. Well, soon-to-be ex-husband. The divorce papers were served last month, but Rick? He doesn't accept no for an answer. Has he hurt you before? She was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Yes." That single word hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd seen enough violence in Vietnam to last several lifetimes, and the thought of this gentle, caring woman being hurt by someone who was supposed to love her made me sick. Well, I said, folding the letter and putting it in my pocket. Rick's going to have to go through me first. Margaret's eyes widened. Mr. Sullivan, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. I stood up and extended my hand to help her up. Come on. Let me drive you home. I don't have a car, she admitted. I've been walking to work every day. Well, that settles it then. From now on, Joe Sullivan is your personal chauffeur. For the first time since I'd found her crying, Margaret smiled. It was like watching the sun come up after the longest night of winter. That was the beginning of everything. For the next 3 weeks, I drove Margaret to and from work every day. At first, our conversations were polite and careful. The weather, how her students were doing, safe topics that didn't venture too close to personal territory. But gradually, we began to open up to each other. I learned that Margaret had grown up on a farm outside Des Moines, the youngest of 4 children. Her father had died when she was 16, and she'd worked 2 jobs to put herself through college. She'd met Rick at a teacher's conference and married him 6 months later, a decision she called the biggest mistake of my life during one of our drives. She learned that I'd enlisted in the Army straight out of high school because I didn't know what else to do with my life. I told her about Vietnam, about the friends I'd lost, about the nightmares that still woke me up some nights. I'd never talked about the war with anyone before, but something about Margaret made me feel safe enough to share those dark corners of my soul. You're a good man, Joe Sullivan, she said one evening as I walked her to her apartment door. She was renting a small place above the bakery on Elm Street, and the smell of fresh bread always made our goodbyes smell like home. I try to be, I replied, though some days it's harder than others. She reached out and touched my arm. The fact that you try is what matters. I was falling in love with her, hard and fast and completely. Every morning I woke up looking forward to our drive to school, and every evening I dreaded saying goodbye. I started finding excuses to extend our time together, stopping for coffee, taking the long way to her apartment, volunteering to help her carry supplies to her classroom. But I was also terrified. Margaret was clearly still dealing with the trauma from her marriage, and the last thing I wanted was to push too hard and send her running. So, I kept my feelings to myself and tried to be the friend she needed. Everything changed on October 15th. I was in Murphy's hardware store again. I'd been spending a lot of time there lately, partly because Murphy gave good advice, and partly because I was thinking about asking Margaret if I could fix some things around her apartment. I was examining a set of screwdrivers when the bell above the door chimed and a stranger walked in. He was about my age, maybe a little younger, with thinning brown hair and the bloated face of someone who'd been hitting the bottle pretty hard. His clothes were wrinkled like he'd slept in them, and he smelled like cigarettes and cheap whiskey. "Excuse me," he said to Murphy. "I'm looking for my wife, Margaret Patterson. Someone told me she might be living around here." My blood ran cold. This had to be Rick. Murphy, bless his heart, didn't even blink. "Don't know anyone by that name, friend. You might try asking over at the post office." Rick's eyes narrowed. "She's got to be here somewhere. Little Bird told me she was teaching at the elementary school." I set down the screwdrivers and walked over. "Can I help you with something?" Rick looked me up and down with the kind of sneer I'd seen on bullies my whole life. "Yeah, maybe you can. I'm Rick Patterson, and I'm looking for my wife. Cute little redhead, about this tall." He held his hand up to about Margaret's height. Probably going by her maiden name now, Margaret O'Brien. My heart started pounding, but I kept my voice level. Like the man said, don't know anyone by that name. But I tell you what, why don't you and I grab a beer and talk about it? I'm buying. Rick's demeanor immediately changed. Apparently, the magic words were, "I'm buying." Well, hell, why didn't you say so? I could use a drink. Otten. I led him to Murphy's Tavern, the little bar next to the hardware store. It was the kind of place where farmers went to complain about crop prices and Old men went to lie about their glory days. Perfect for what I had in mind. "So, Rick," I said, ordering us both a beer, "tell me about this wife of yours." For the next hour, Rick proceeded to tell me everything I never wanted to know about his relationship with Margaret. How they'd met, how he'd swept her off her feet with grand romantic gestures, how she'd changed after they got married. Got all cold on me, he slurred into his third beer. Started flinching every time I tried to touch her. A man's got needs, you know? A man's got rights. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to punch him in his stupid, drunk face right then and there. Instead, I nodded sympathetically and ordered him another beer. "Women," I said, shaking my head. "Can't live with them, can't live without them, right?" Rick laughed like I'd said the funniest thing in the world. "Exactly. You get it. Most guys don't get it." "So what's the plan?" I asked. "You gonna try to win her back?" "Win her back, hell," Rick said, his voice getting darker. "She's my wife. Till death do us part and all that. She comes home with me whether she wants to or not." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't just about a man trying to reconcile with his estranged wife. This was about control, possession, and possibly violence. "Well, good luck finding her," I said, finishing my beer and standing up. "I'm sure she'll come around." Rick grabbed my arm as I started to leave. "Hey, you seem like a good guy. If you hear anything about a Margaret O'Brien or Patterson, you'll let me know, right? I'm staying at the Cedar Inn." I looked down at his hand on my arm, and something in my expression must have warned him off, because he immediately let go. "Sure thing, Rick. I'll keep my ears open." I walked out of that bar with my mind racing. Margaret was in real danger, and Rick wasn't going to give up and go home. I had to warn her, but I also had to figure out how to protect her without making the situation worse. When I picked Margaret up from school that afternoon, I could tell something was wrong the moment she got in the truck. "Joe," she said, her voice shaking, "someone was asking about me at the bakery today. Mrs. Kowalski said a man came in looking for Margaret O'Brien. He knew that was my maiden name." "I know," I said quietly. "I met him." Margaret went white as a sheet. "What?" I pulled over to the side of the road and turned to face her. "His name's Rick, right? About 5'8". Brown hair. Looks like he's been drinking too much." She nodded, tears already forming in her eyes. "Margaret, listen to me very carefully. He's not just looking for you. He's planning to take you back with him, whether you want to go or not. He's staying at the Cedar Inn, and he's been drinking all day." "Oh, God," she whispered, covering her face with her hands. "I knew this would happen. I should have kept running. I should have gone to California or Florida or—" "No," I said firmly, taking her hands in mine. "You shouldn't have to keep running. You deserve to have a life, a home, a place where you feel safe. But what can I do? If I call the police, he'll just charm his way out of it. He's good at that. And even if they arrest him, he'll just come back when they let him go." I was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, an idea started to form. Crazy, risky, but it might work. "Margaret, do you trust me?" She looked into my eyes for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally. "I do." "Then here's what we're going to do." My plan was simple in concept but required perfect timing. I would go back to Murphy's Tavern that evening and continue playing the role of Rick's new drinking buddy. I'd get him as drunk as possible while subtly gathering information about his plans. Meanwhile, Margaret would pack her most important belongings and wait at my apartment. If Rick was planning to leave town the next day, we'd wait him out. If he was planning to stay and search for her, we'd have to get more creative. The plan started well enough. Rick was already at Murphy's when I arrived at 7 o'clock, well into his cups and eager for company. "Joe, my new best friend," he called out, waving me over. "Come drink with me." For the next 2 hours, I nursed one beer, while Rick put away at least 6. He told me more about his relationship with Margaret, each story more controlling and frightening than the last. He talked about how he'd isolated her from her friends and family, how he'd convinced her that no one else would ever love her. how he'd used her insecurities against her. "The thing is," he said, leaning close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath, "Maggie's got this idea that she can make it on her own. But she can't. She needs me. She's always needed me." "So what's your plan?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Rick's eyes gleamed with something that made my stomach turn. "Well, I figure I'll find her tomorrow, have a little heart-to-heart conversation. Remind her of all the good times we had together. And if that doesn't work," he shrugged, "well, a man's got to do what a man's got to do." The casual way he said it, like he was talking about fixing a leaky faucet instead of threatening violence against his wife, made my blood run cold. "Sounds like you've got it all figured out," I said. "Damn right I do. 20 years in construction teaches a man how to solve problems." Rick finished his beer and signaled for another. "Speaking of which, I should probably call it a night soon. Got a big day tomorrow." Austin, my heart started racing. If Rick went back to his hotel now, he might start his search first thing in the morning. I needed to keep him here longer, give Margaret more time to prepare. "Come on, man," I said, clapping him on the back. "The night's still young. Let me buy you one more round." Rick grinned. "Now you're talking." 3 drinks later, Rick was barely coherent. He was slurring his words so badly, I could only understand about half of what he was saying. Perfect. "Tell you what, Rick," I said, helping him to his feet. "Let me drive you back to your hotel. You're in no condition to walk." "You're a good friend, Joe," he mumbled, leaning heavily on my arm. "Best friend I ever had." I got Rick into my truck and drove him to the Cedar Inn. It took both me and the desk clerk to get him up to his room, where he immediately collapsed fully clothed on the bed and started snoring. The desk clerk, a young guy named Tommy who'd graduated from Cedar Falls High 2 years earlier, shook his head. "Man's been drinking like this every night since he checked in." "Should I call someone?" "Nah," I said. "He'll sleep it off." "But hey, if he comes asking about anyone tomorrow, a teacher or anyone like that, you might want to play dumb. Guy gives me the creeps." Tommy nodded. "Yeah, me too." "Don't worry, Mr. Sullivan. I won't tell him nothing." I drove back to my apartment, where I found Margaret sitting at my small kitchen table with 2 suitcases at her feet. She looked up when I came in, her eyes wide with worry. "How did it go?" I told her about my evening with Rick, about his plans and his threats. With each detail, Margaret seemed to shrink into herself. "I'm so sorry," she said when I finished. "I've brought this nightmare into your life, into this whole town. Maybe I should just go with him. Maybe that would be easier for everyone." "Margaret O'Brien Patterson," I said, kneeling down in front of her chair. "Don't you dare say that. Don't you dare let that man make you believe you deserve anything less than happiness and safety." Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "But what if he hurts someone else trying to get to me? What if he hurts you?" I reached up and gently wiped away her tears. "Then he hurts me. But I'm not going to let him hurt you. Not ever again." She looked into my eyes, and something passed between us in that moment. An understanding, a promise, a recognition of something deeper than friendship. "Joe," she whispered, "I think I'm falling in love with you." My heart nearly stopped. "Margaret, I know it's crazy," she continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know I'm still technically married and dealing with all this mess with Rick. And I know you probably see me as damaged goods." I silenced her with a kiss. It was soft and gentle and tasted like tears and hope and the promise of better days ahead. When we broke apart, I rested my forehead against hers. "I've been in love with you since the day I saw you standing on those school steps," I said. "And you're not damaged goods. You're the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever known." We spent that night talking until dawn, sharing secrets and dreams and fears we'd never told another soul. Margaret told me about her childhood on the farm, about the father she'd adored and lost too young, about her dreams of traveling the world and teaching children in different countries. I told her about growing up poor in Chicago, about my mother who'd worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, about the friends I'd lost in Vietnam and the guilt that still kept me awake some nights. As the sun came up over Cedar Falls, painting Margaret's face in soft golden light, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. "Marry me," I said. Margaret's eyes widened. "Joe, we can't. I don't mean right now," I said quickly. "I mean when you're free. When the divorce is final and Rick is out of your life for good. Marry me, Margaret. Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be afraid again." She was quiet for so long I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said. "When all this is over and I can think clearly. Ask me again and I'll give you an answer." It wasn't yes, but it wasn't no either. It was hope, and that was enough. The next morning, Tommy from the Cedar Inn called to tell me that Rick had checked out early, leaving nothing but empty beer bottles and unpaid room service charges. He'd been seen loading his car and driving east toward the interstate. We waited a week, then 2 weeks, then a month. No sign of Rick. Margaret's divorce papers came through in November, and she officially became Margaret O'Brien again. We started dating openly, though by then everyone in town had figured out we were sweet on each other. On Valentine's Day, 1984, exactly 6 months after that night in my apartment, I asked Margaret to marry me again. This time, she said yes, without hesitation. We were married on June 2nd, 1984, in the little white church on Maple Street. The whole town turned out for the wedding. Murphy walked Margaret down the aisle. Mrs. Henderson made the cake and brought 3 of her cats as unofficial wedding guests. And even Principal Morrison cried during the ceremony. For our honeymoon, we drove to Colorado and spent a week in a little cabin near Rocky Mountain National Park. We hiked and fished and made love and planned our future together. Margaret wanted to keep teaching, and I wanted to support her dreams however I could. Life was perfect for exactly 14 months. In August of 1985, Margaret came home from her doctor's appointment with tears in her eyes. But for once, they were happy tears. "Joe," she said, throwing her arms around my neck, "I'm pregnant." I picked her up and spun her around our little kitchen, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. We'd been trying for a baby since our wedding night, and had started to worry that it might not happen for us. Margaret was radiant during her pregnancy. She had that glow that people talk about, and she spent hours planning the nursery and reading books about child development. I started working overtime to save money for the baby, picking up weekend shifts and doing maintenance work for other people in town. Everything was going perfectly until Margaret's 7th month. She was at school teaching her second graders about the solar system when the cramping started. By the time I got the call from Principal Morrison, Margaret was already at the hospital in Cedar Rapids, 45 minutes away. I drove like a man possessed, praying to every god I could think of to let my wife and baby be okay. When I got to the hospital, Dr. Peterson met me in the waiting room with the kind of expression doctors wear when they have to deliver terrible news. "Joe," he said gently, "Margaret's going to be fine. But the baby, our son, we'd planned to name him David Joseph Sullivan, was born sleeping. He was perfect in every way, except the most important one. Margaret held him for hours, singing lullabies and telling him about all the adventures they would have had together. The grief nearly destroyed us. Margaret blamed herself, convinced that the stress from Rick had somehow caused the miscarriage. I blamed myself for not being able to protect them both. We went through the motions of daily life for months, but we were just shadows of ourselves. It was Mrs. Henderson, of all people, who finally got through to us. She showed up at our door one evening in March with a casserole and a photo album full of pictures of all the cats she'd lost over the years. "Grief is love with nowhere to go," she told us. sitting at our kitchen table and flipping through pictures of cats with names like Mr. Whiskers and Princess Fluffington. But love doesn't die just because its object does. You find new places to put it. She was right, of course. Slowly, carefully, Margaret and I began to heal. We started talking about trying again, about adoption, about all the ways we could build a family together. In 1987, we got the call we'd been hoping for. A young woman in Des Moines was pregnant with twins and looking for a family to adopt them. She'd chosen us from dozens of applicants because, she said, we looked like people who understood that love was more important than biology. Michael and Sarah Sullivan were born on October 15th, 1987, exactly 4 years to the day after I'd first met Rick in Murphy's hardware store. Life has a funny way of writing its own poetry. Being parents was everything we'd dreamed it would be, and nothing like we'd expected. Michael was quiet and thoughtful, always building elaborate structures with his blocks or drawing detailed pictures of imaginary animals. Sarah was a whirlwind of energy and questions, the kind of kid who could turn a simple trip to the grocery store into an adventure. Margaret threw herself into motherhood with the same passion she brought to everything else. She read parenting books, joined playgroups, and somehow managed to make our small house feel like the warmest, most welcoming place on earth. I loved watching her with the kids. She had this way of listening to them, really listening, that made even their silliest concerns seem important. When Michael was afraid of monsters under his bed, she didn't just dismiss his fears. She helped him design a monster-proof blanket fort. When Sarah announced at age 4 that she wanted to be a dinosaur when she grew up, Margaret checked out every book about paleontology from the library and spent weeks helping her daughter learn the names of different species. The kids grew up knowing they were adopted and knowing that their birth mother loved them enough to choose the best possible family for them. We stayed in touch with Jessica, their birth mother, through letters and photos. She eventually finished college and became a social worker, helping other young mothers navigate difficult decisions. High school was when everything started to go wrong again. Michael had always been the responsible one, the kid who did his homework without being asked and never missed curfew. But sometime during his junior year, he fell in with a group of kids who thought they were invincible. They started with small stuff, skipping classes, smoking behind the gym, but it escalated quickly. Sarah, meanwhile, was struggling with her identity as an adopted child. She'd started asking harder questions about why her birth mother had given her up, whether her real parents would have loved her more, whether Margaret and I saw her as a burden we'd taken on out of charity. Margaret and I did our best to navigate these choppy waters, but parenting teenagers is like trying to perform surgery during an earthquake. Just when you think you've got everything under control, the ground shifts beneath your feet. The call came at 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night in April, during Michael's senior year. He'd been drinking at a party and decided to drive home instead of calling us for a ride. The police officer who called said he'd crossed the center line on Highway 63 and hit a semi-truck head-on. Michael died instantly. The truck driver, a father of 3 from Nebraska, spent 2 weeks in intensive care, but eventually recovered. I don't remember much about the next few months. People brought food and sent cards and said all the things people say when tragedy strikes. But none of it penetrated the fog of grief that surrounded Margaret and me. We moved through our days like sleepwalkers, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. Sarah was angry at Michael for being so stupid, at us for not preventing it somehow, at God for taking her brother, at herself for all the times she'd been mean to him when they were kids. She started acting out in ways that scared us, staying out all night, getting arrested for shoplifting, dating boys who were clearly bad news. Margaret tried to hold our family together, but I could see her breaking down a little more each day. She'd stand in Michael's room for hours, touching his things and crying silently. She stopped eating regularly, stopped sleeping through the night, stopped being the vibrant, joyful woman I'd fallen in love with. I wasn't handling it much better. I started drinking more than I should have, spending long hours at Murphy's Tavern trying to numb the pain. I'd sit there listening to other men complain about their teenagers and want to scream at them, "At least your kids are alive to disappoint you." The turning point came when Sarah, then 17, announced that she was dropping out of school to marry her boyfriend Danny, a 22-year-old with a criminal record and a motorcycle. "You can't stop me," she said, standing in our living room with her arms crossed and her chin raised in defiance. "I'm almost 18, and Danny loves me more than you ever have." That's when Margaret finally broke. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice shaking with rage and grief. "Don't you dare stand there and tell me I don't love you. I have loved you since the moment they placed you in my arms. I have loved you through every scraped knee and broken heart and stupid mistake. I loved you enough to let you be angry and rebellious and awful to me because I knew you were hurting. But I will not stand here and let you destroy your life because you're too scared to deal with your pain." Sarah started crying then, not the angry tears of a defiant teenager, but the broken sobs of a child who'd lost her way. "I miss him so much," she whispered. "I miss Michael so much, and I don't know how to live without him." Margaret wrapped Sarah in her arms, and for the first time since the accident, we cried together as a family. We talked until dawn about Michael, about our grief, about how we could honor his memory by taking care of each other instead of destroying ourselves. Sarah didn't marry Danny. Instead, she went back to school and eventually earned her GED. She's now a counselor who works with at-risk youth, helping kids who are making the same kinds of dangerous choices Michael made. She says it's her way of making sure his death meant something. Margaret and I went to grief counseling together. It was awkward at first. Neither of us was comfortable talking about our feelings with a stranger. But Dr. Williams helped us understand that grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry. "Love doesn't end when someone dies," she told us during one of our sessions. "It just changes form. The question is, what are you going to do with all that love you still have for Michael?" We decided to establish a scholarship fund in Michael's name for students who wanted to study architecture. He'd dreamed of designing buildings that would last for centuries. Every year, we award scholarships to 3 graduating seniors from Cedar Falls High School. Life slowly found its rhythm again. Margaret went back to teaching with renewed purpose, determined to make a difference in every child's life. I started coaching Little League Baseball, partly because I missed having kids around, and partly because I wanted to teach young people about making good decisions. In 1995, when Sarah was 25, she gave us our first grandchild, a beautiful little girl named Jessica, after her birth mother. 2 years later came David Michael, named after the son we'd lost and the brother Sarah would never forget. Being grandparents was a joy we'd never expected. Margaret would spend hours reading to Jesse and David, teaching them about nature and art and the importance of being kind to others. I taught them how to fish and how to throw a baseball and how to change a tire, all the practical skills their parents were too busy to pass on. But our happiness was overshadowed by a growing concern about Margaret's health. She'd been losing weight and seemed tired all the time. She insisted it was just the normal effects of aging. She was 62 by then. But I knew something was wrong. In the spring of 2001, Margaret was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. The doctor gave us the statistics, the treatment options, the prognosis. Stage 3, he said. Aggressive but treatable. With chemotherapy and surgery, she had a 60 chance of living 5 more years. Margaret faced cancer with the same quiet courage she'd shown throughout her life. She continued teaching right up until the day before her first surgery, determined not to let her students down in the middle of the school year. During chemotherapy, she wore colorful scarves instead of wigs and told everyone she was starting a new fashion trend. "I've had a good life, Joe," she told me one evening as we sat on our porch swing watching the sunset. "Whatever happens, I've had a good life." "We're not done yet," I said, squeezing her hand. "We've got grandchildren to spoil and places to travel and years of happiness ahead of us." She smiled, but I could see in her eyes that she wasn't as optimistic as I was trying to be. The treatment worked at first. Margaret went into remission and stayed there for almost 2 years. We thought we'd beaten it. We started making plans again. A trip to Ireland to see where her grandparents had come from, renovations to the house, a vegetable garden that would be the envy of the neighborhood. But in late 2003, the cancer came back with a vengeance. This time, there were no statistics about 5-year survival rates. This time, the doctor talked about making her comfortable and spending quality time with family. Margaret lived for 8 more months. They were hard months, filled with pain and medication, and the gradual loss of the woman I'd loved for 20 years. But they were also filled with moments of grace, quiet conversations about our life together, visits from former students who wanted to thank her for believing in them, afternoons spent looking through photo albums and remembering happier times. She died on a Tuesday morning in June 2004, holding my hand and Sarah's hand, with sunlight streaming through the hospital window. Her last words were, "Take care of each other." The funeral was standing room only. Margaret had touched so many lives during her career as a teacher that people came from all over Iowa to pay their respects. Former students, now adults with children of their own, stood up to share stories about how Mrs. Sullivan had changed their lives. One young woman, crying as she spoke, said, "Mrs. Sullivan didn't just teach me how to read. She taught me that I was worth something, that my dreams mattered. I became a teacher because of her, and now I try to pass on that gift to my own students." After the funeral, I didn't know how to exist without Margaret. For 41 years, she'd been my partner, my best friend, the center of my universe. Suddenly, I was 65 years old and completely alone for the first time since I was 24. I went through a dark period. I stopped taking care of myself, stopped answering the phone, stopped participating in the community activities that had once been important to me. Sarah was worried enough to move back to Cedar Falls temporarily, just to make sure I was eating and paying my bills. "Dad," she said one evening, finding me sitting in Margaret's chair, staring at nothing, "you're scaring me. Mom wouldn't want this for you." She was right, of course. Margaret had made me promise during one of our last conversations that I wouldn't stop living just because she was gone. "You have too much love left to give," she'd said. "Find ways to share it. Find ways to make a difference. Don't waste the years you have left mourning the years we won't have together." So I started small. I began volunteering at the elementary school where Margaret had taught, helping kids with reading difficulties. I joined the Rotary Club and helped organize their annual scholarship fundraiser. I started attending church again, not because I'd found religion, but because I needed the community and the sense of purpose. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life as a widower. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was a life worth living. In 2018, when I was 79 years old, Sarah convinced me to start this YouTube channel. She said I had too many good stories to keep them to myself, and that maybe sharing them would help other people feel less alone. "You've lived through so much, Dad," she said. "Vietnam, love, loss, parenthood, grief. People need to hear these stories. They need to know they're not the only ones who've struggled." I was skeptical at first. What did I know about computers and cameras and the internet? But Sarah helped me set everything up, and I discovered that I actually enjoyed talking to the camera, sharing memories of Margaret and Michael and all the adventures we'd had together. The channel started small, maybe 20 or 30 views per video, but gradually it began to grow. People started leaving comments, sharing their own stories of love and loss. I realized that Sarah was right. We all need to know we're not alone in this world. Margaret would have loved this channel, I think. She always said that stories have the power to heal, to connect us, to remind us of our shared humanity. Every time I sit down in front of that camera, I feel like I'm carrying on her work in my own small way. And that brings me to now, folks. 3 years since Margaret passed. And I'm still here, still telling stories, still trying to make sense of it all. Sarah lives about an hour away with her husband, Mark, a good man who treats her like the treasure she is. Jesse is 28 now and just got engaged to a wonderful young man named Chris. David is 26 and working as a social worker, following in his mother's footsteps of helping people in need. I still live in the same house where Margaret and I raised our kids. Sometimes people ask me why I don't downsize, move to a retirement community, sell all the memories and start fresh. But this house isn't just where I live, it's where we lived. Every room holds a piece of our story together. I can still hear Margaret's laugh echoing from the kitchen, where she used to experiment with new recipes. I can still see Michael at 8 years old, building elaborate Lego cities on the living room floor. I can still picture Sarah practicing her lines for the school play in front of the hallway mirror. The love we shared didn't die when they did. It transformed into something else. Gratitude for the time we had together, determination to honor their memories, hope that our story might help someone else feel less alone in their struggles. People ask me sometimes if I ever think about dating again, finding someone to share my golden years with. The answer is no, not really. What Margaret and I had was lightning in a bottle, the kind of once-in-a-lifetime love that most people never experience. I'm not looking to replace that. I'm looking to celebrate it, to share it, to let it inspire others to believe in the possibility of finding their own lightning. But I'll tell you what I'm looking for: connection, community, the chance to be useful, to matter, to contribute something positive to this crazy world we're all trying to navigate together. That's why this channel means so much to me. Every view, every comment, every person who takes a few minutes out of their day to listen to an old man's stories. That's connection. That's community. That's proof that love doesn't end when life does. It just finds new ways to express itself. I see in the comments that some of you have lost spouses, children, parents, best friends. Some of you are struggling with difficult relationships, wondering if love is worth the risk of eventual heartbreak. Some of you are young and hopeful, looking for evidence that true love really exists. Let me tell you something, beautiful people. It does exist. Love is real, and it's worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth opening your heart to even when you're terrified of being hurt. Margaret and I had 41 years together. And if I could go back knowing everything I know now, knowing about the miscarriage and Michael's accident and the cancer and all the pain that love would eventually bring, I'd still choose her. I'd still choose all of it. Because here's what I've learned in my 65 years on this planet. Love isn't about avoiding pain. Pain is inevitable. Heartbreak is part of the human experience. Love is about deciding that connection, intimacy, and shared joy are worth the risk of eventual loss. Margaret used to say that we're all just walking each other home. We come into this world alone and we leave it alone, but in between, we have the opportunity to share the journey with other people. The goal isn't to protect ourselves from getting hurt. The goal is to make the journey as meaningful and connected as possible. So that's my message to you today. Whether you're 18 or 80, open your heart. Take the risk. Tell people you love them while you still can. Create memories that will sustain you through the hard times. Build relationships that will outlast your physical presence in this world. And if you've already experienced loss, if you're grieving someone you can't imagine living without, know that the love you shared hasn't disappeared. It's still there, waiting to be transformed into something new. Maybe it becomes service to others. Maybe it becomes wisdom shared with younger generations. Maybe it becomes a YouTube channel where an old man tells stories about the woman who taught him how to love. The point is, it doesn't end. Love doesn't end. All right, beautiful people, that's my story for today. I hope it touched your heart somehow, or at least helped you feel a little less alone in whatever you're going through. Before I go, I need to ask you that favor I mentioned at the beginning. If this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or remember someone important in your own life, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you know when I've got a new story to share. And most importantly, leave me a comment telling me what you thought. I read every single comment, and they mean more to me than you can imagine. Your stories, your thoughts, your own experiences with love and loss, they remind me that we're all in this together. They give me hope that these old memories might have some value in your young lives. Remember, 96 of you are watching without subscribing, and that makes this old heart of mine a little sad. Subscribing is free, and it really helps the channel reach more people who might need to hear these stories. Next week, I'm thinking about telling you the story of how I accidentally became the town hero by catching a bank robber with a fishing net. Or maybe the time Margaret convinced me to take ballroom dancing lessons, and I ended up performing in the county fair talent show. Let me know in the comments which story you'd like to hear first. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other. Remember that you're loved, you matter, and your story, whatever it is, deserves to be told. This is Joe Sullivan from Mind Blowing Stories, reminding you that every day above ground is a good day, and every chance to love someone is a gift. I'll see you next week, beautiful people. Don't forget to subscribe.